Okay, in this video we're going to be talking about normal mapping and normals, face normals and vertex normals, all of the normals. Normals are responsible for so many really important things on surfaces, and they're something that you can't avoid dealing with. So I'm taking this opportunity to just kind of cover everything that you really need to know about normals in one video. So this may take a little bit longer. Please do maybe take some notes if you want to take notes. Get that pause button ready. Maybe try some of the stuff out. So if we look at this wonderful sphere, it's lovely, right? It's, you know, it's nice and shiny. Well, not shiny, but it's nice and illuminated and spherical and wonderful. And it's a complete and utter lie. This is not a sphere. This is actually a single plane. In fact, this is a single plane with just an aim constraint on it. If I take that and I rotate it to the side, you can see just how important normals are. So normals are controlling the shading of the surface. It's just flat, and yet it looks like it's completely round because of the normal map and an alpha channel, right? An alpha cut surface. So the idea of a normal map is that it's just simply shading the surface based on fake normals. So what are these normals? What are they for? Why do we want them? Why do we even care about any of this stuff? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's why we're here. Let's go to 5 shaded mode here, and I'm going to press Q to go into just regular selection mode. Now let's go to display polygons, face normals, and we will see a face normal. What this does is it tells you the direction that the face is pointing in. This is useful for a number of different reasons. In terms of lighting, when we're only doing single-sided lighting, which is the current default in Maya, it wasn't always the default, but it is the current default, it knows which side to light, which side not to light. This can be also useful as an error detection method to tell if our normals are reversed or not, at least in some cases. But it's also useful for things like collision, and it's also useful in some nifty little shading tricks. So let's say I do want to light both sides, which, I mean, in the viewport it's not working, but when I render it, it certainly is going to work. I'm going to see both sides. And so with two-sided lighting in the viewport, you can see both sides are being lit. I'm going to assign an existing material that I've already set up, and I'll show you how that's put together. And so lighting the bottom side, render it, and we can see red here. And if we take that light and take the top side, we hit the render button for that. Let's just fix that, because right now it's using the wrong one. You can see blue, and red, right? And this is coming from this. This is just two colors from a blend node, which could be two different textures. Let's say we're trying to do money or paper in a book where there's different images on either side of that surface. So, you know, pages in a book, it could be double-sided mirrors where you're controlling two different shaders. One's reflective and one's, you know, see-through. You could control two different shaders this way. And it's all coming off of this idea of a flipped normal. We could also go based off the normal angle, which is what it was previously set to, which mimics the idea of a Fresnel shader, where, you know, you're different based on the angle. So if you're looking at two-tone paint, as an example. So there's lots of reasons why face normals are fairly useful, which direction is facing which way, and you know what that value is. That's what we would use it for. So collision, shading, lighting, in general for the surface. But another form of shading, and a very important one, is coming from the vertex normal. So if we just go back to 5, which is sort of default shaded, it's not been calculating from the lighting in the scene. I'm going to grab this object and we're going to go to our mesh display, and I'm just going to tear that off just by clicking the double lines there. And I will turn off this polygon face normal. Let's try that again. Display polygons face normal. There we go. Press Q for the moment, and I'm going to grab a vertex here. I'm going to go to the Vertex Normal Edit tool. Now, in the default Maya viewport, when you're dealing with the camera here, the camera is actually the light source. So as you angle away from it, you may see things are getting darker and lighter. Well, if I take this vertex and I lean it away from the camera, it gets darker, and towards the camera, it gets brighter. Now you'll also notice that this is doing some weird shading in that it's trying to work its way to this other vertex here. If we use this one and do it, we can see that it's working between the two other vertices, and it's more even looking. And that's just the nature of what 3D tools do, right? They're all based off of the idea of triangles. It's always calculating based on triangles. So all the shading is calculated by triangles. And if you were to do UVs, and I were to grab this UV, the texture would scale and skew on both sides. Whereas if I were to grab this one, the texture would only scale and skew on this side, yet not on that side. Because it's always thinking in triangles, always. So what else can we do with this information? Well, the idea of modular design is very popular in games. So if I were to take a simple object like this, grab that chunk here, this here, there, grab this lovely little edge, shift, right click, detach component, and we can even separate that, mesh separate. And there we go, we've got two different pieces. They're completely separate. Right? And clearly they're separate because, well, look at that in the middle there, right? That's an issue. So if I'm creating a modular environment, say a modular cliff face where I've got all these stones kind of lined and all the vertices aligned perfectly, I can snap them together and get lots of variation off of that. But we have this visible scene. Sometimes the normal map can fix that if it's set up correctly, but other times it's not going to fix it, right? So how do we fix it? Well, I'm just going to go ahead and go to vertex mode, and I will grab both of those. I'll grab this one and go into vertex mode, Control Shift, so I only add, and I'll grab those ones. And then I'll go into that vertex edit tool, and you can see that both of them are separated. I'm just going to quickly grab that, and you're going to see that they're going to align. So now it looks like one continuous mesh, even though it's still two separate pieces. So by aligning those, I get what I needed. I get the illusion of one continuous surface. So for modular environments, very important. For dealing with medium to low poly objects as well, if you're not adding a lot of points and edges to a surface, you need something to fix the shading on that surface. So let's look at some other shading related issues. So if I grab this face here, and I'm going to go to my mesh display, reverse, because I have two-sided lighting, I'm not really going to see the fact that this is essentially inside out. If I, of course, change that, it's going to immediately tell me because it's going to be black, right? It's going to show up as black. This is not a hole, this is just a backwards face. This, in one way, is referred to as non-manifold geometry, and it's really just a reverse normal. Non-manifold geometry comes in multiple flavors. You have two faces sharing one vertex. To fix that, you basically separate the vertex and it's happy. Another is grabbing this and extruding it out, and you get a T intersection. And all of these prevent the idea of inserting edge loops from being able to calculate, at least correctly in many cases. So this one seems to be forgiving of the reverse normals, but this one does not. So the fix for that one would be to separate that face off, to extract it off of there, and even though it might be part of the mesh, it's just not connected at those vertices. For this one, the ways that we can fix it: mesh cleanup, non-manifold geometry will fix it, or mesh display, reverse if I select that individual one, or I can go with conform, and conform will say, hey, you're different from everybody else, let's make you conform. Now in all these cases, it doesn't necessarily fix the alignment of these by vertex face. So if we just go to vertex face mode here, and we go to our little tool, mesh display, vertex normal edit tool, and we were to select these, it's a little bit hard to see. Maybe a little bit easier there now. You can see right here that these two are not aligned, nor are these, nor are these. So that's an overall alignment issue. If I go ahead and go mesh display and say average or soften edge, either one will do it with nothing selected. It will unify them. They'll all be facing the same direction, which of course corrects that issue. It, however, is not quite fixing the issue that we have here. So averaging everything is not giving me good shading results there. So the better option, of course, would be to select this and maybe soften edge on that. And there we have it. So better overall result. So you can see just averaging normals can lead to different sort of shading artifacts. I don't even know if you can see it on the video there, but there's still a subtle kind of glow there. It's just the nature of lower polygon surfaces. You can still see some of the shading issues here. So it's not like it's going to be perfect, but at least it gets sort of close. So we can affect these by going to vertex faces and handling them individually and changing, just a single one, which is going to affect the shading of just that one piece. So you can see that one section of the polygon is going weird, and sometimes you might see stuff like this happen on your models. Why does this happen? Well, it's because the normals have been locked. Once you alter them in certain ways, it's going to lock the normals. When you bring models in, it's going to lock the normals. When you add edge loops or do extrudes and stuff like that, often normals will get locked during the modeling process. So a quick way to fix that, of course, is going under mesh display and saying unlock normals, where it's going to try and fix what's going wrong. Kind of average them out based off of some preconceived ideas. So this has been somewhat corrected. We can intentionally add edges by hardening them. Mesh display, harden edge, and give the illusion of seams where there are none to create separation, to make firm a nice edge. And of course, when we do things like grabbing an object like this and go mesh display average on that, we get really bizarre results because unifying those corners right there is not ideal. It's not going to give us the best possible quality result because now this is facing really far away from us in order to unify with these other faces which are also actually facing away from the camera. So this is not an ideal situation. This is one of many different visual artifacts that you'll see. So either they're getting dark or they're doing kind of like a glowy look. Maybe there's visible seams. These can all be the result of locked normals or normals that have been manipulated in an odd way. So I'm going to unlock the normals. And it's going to set them the faces there. And we're going to look at one more type of visual issue, which is not exactly related directly to normals, but sort of related to normals. Let's make this big. Go. I'm just going to duplicate that. And I think I will make this reverse. And if you have sensitivity to flickering, if it causes seizures, you might want to look away. I'll tell you when to look back. This kind of flickering, what you see here, is called Zfighting. It's the result of one mesh being really close to the other. And so if you're seeing that, that is typically an indication of one of two things. Either your camera settings are slightly off, which is easy enough to fix. You go to your perspective camera, you select it, and go to attributes. And by the way, you can look back now if you're sensitive. It's no longer flickering. We can go here and select the camera and go to its settings. Near clip plane, you want to change that, and the far clip plane. You can set this to, like a 1 and then add a 0. So you basically change the decimal places that are there. This is set for working in small scale, right, the 1 centimeter. If you want to start working in real world scale, this should be a 1, and this should, add 1 or 2 zeros to that. And that will eliminate some of those kind of weird glitches where sometimes the edges of cubes or other objects, hard edges, you'll see tiny little triangles start to appear, tiny little black triangles. And that's a culling artifact. And then the Zfighting is when the values are so close within this sort of 0.01 tolerance, it doesn't know what to do with them. It's like which one is in front and which one's in back. And so it tries to render both of them and it doesn't know what to do. So that's the issue there. So those are some of the visual artifacts that you would deal with when dealing with that. The next thing to talk about is the idea of normal maps. So that wonderful sphere that we did at the beginning there, that was a really simple trick. I had a sphere, which I made nice and round. I had a single polyplane, and I went to my rendering tab, lighting and shading, transfer maps, and I chose a normal map. Chose where I was going to save it, the format. I'm using tangent space versus object space. What's the difference? Well, tangent space can be modified. It can be modified in terms of its shape. So characters where arms move up and down, it deforms. Tangent space can be deformed without any kind of visual artifacts appearing. Object space are only able to be manipulated by actual their centers, right? You can't change their shape. Otherwise the lighting won't calculate correctly. Then I have my common output where I went ahead and set my resolution for my normal map that was generated from the high poly to my low poly, which is here. Target mesh is your low poly, source is your high poly. Got add selected. You have your UVs that it's baking to. And in world space, where they're sitting right over top of each other, versus say object space, where their centers are the same, or UV space where they're using the same UV space. And then there's the filtering that we use. I've got this set to triangular to give slightly sharper results, but you can use whatever you want. If you want something softer, you can go back to Gaussian. And the filter size and how it works with that. So it's just how it calculates the softness or sharpness. Then we have the fill texture seams, which of course along the edges of UVs, which are basically vector information. They're math information as opposed to pixels. It may cut through individual pixels. So it takes part of the pixels on one side and part of the pixels on the other side, and you get visible seams. So to fix it, it basically duplicates all the pixels along the edge, just beyond the border. And because they're both the same, you don't have any of that overlap issue. So on really high-res stuff, I'll often go with a fill texture seams of about 2, because there's a potential for it to cross the border multiple times. So that's how that was accomplished. Now, visually, what was done is first we start off with the simple basis. We have 50% gray, 50% gray, and white. This calculates as flat. It basically says whatever the existing vertex normals are in that section, use those values. What we do from there is a per pixel offset. So basically what we're doing is we're taking a surface that has a whole bunch of pixels on it. So let's pretend that we're dealing with a surface like this, and we're adding a whole bunch of pixels to that surface, which mimic the idea of new vertex normals. And we're going to go ahead and grab those, and we're going to manipulate them. So on the green channel, we're moving it forwards and backwards. And for the red channel, we're moving it from side to side. And for the blue channel, it doesn't really have angle information. What it works as is essentially an emphasis of those values, sort of a contrast for them. And it's supposed to mimic the idea of depth information without actually changing the depth. And so it can enhance values in certain areas, so make their angles seem sharper. So in the case of our wonderful sphere here, you can see that the blue channel has got emphasis here, and then it moves to more subtle flat volumes here. But there's still angle information there. So the red channel, left to right, green channel, up and down. In an OpenGL setup, this is what you see here, but in a DirectX setup, this may be inverted. So if I were to press Control-I, press Control-I, or you're not working, wrong layer selected, that's why. Control-I, you'll see that it inverts that channel. So it doesn't change anything else because it's based on a mid value, right? A mid grayscale. So inverting these is the fastest way to go ahead and change it. And in fact, in tools, a lot of tools, there may be like a flip green channel or flip red channel, which you can see inside of Maya when you apply a normal map. So if I were to assign existing materials, attributes, go into Lambert. That's not the one that I wanted. Number 2. Number 3. There we go. We have, first of all, it has to be set to raw because we can't have that. We want to get rid of the filtering, otherwise we get weird, glitchy, jaggy bits at the edges. But this is based off of a bump map which is set to tangent space. And in the Arnold channel here, we've got automatically it's set to flip the RNG channels. We also have this option for use derivatives, and the use derivatives deals with the idea that if you have symmetrical UVs where you have one half is unwrapped and then overlaid on the other half, the part of those UVs are basically backwards. And so in normal map terms, that means whatever it was, show it as inside out, because the direction that the UVs are pointing does affect how the normal map usually renders. However, the use derivatives says ignore that and just, if the UVs are reversed, invert the values a second time to fix those kinds of issues. So if you're seeing visible seams down the middle or something like that because of the way that you've unwrapped it, you can use that, or you can turn it off if you want to invert them. So we're learning a ton of stuff about normals, hopefully. Hopefully you got a whole bunch of information going on here. So there's yet still a little bit more information regarding normals to deal with. So here I've gone ahead and I've beveled the surface, done a singular bevel. And part of the issue is, of course, that I've got n-gons. In a few areas there are some n-gons. Where are they? There's one right there, and this is one right here. So that's one issue that I have to deal with. But besides that, there's also just the fact that the vertex normals are not facing the right direction. Part of this comes from the polybevel issue where we have mitering set to auto. We want to go ahead and set that to none, and that's going to change how it calculates that. So that's one thing that we can do. And then of course we want to apply, say, a smooth to this. We go to our modeling, mesh display, and I'll just quickly unlock the normals, and then I will go to set to face, and we have the option to match the face normal, which is getting towards the idea of a face weighted normal system. If I do this, it will set them to face, but it will also unlock the normals, whereas this will set them to the face but also lock them. So if I go ahead and set to face, you notice nothing really changed because they're based on the angle of the face here. But when I do a soften edge, it's going to try and respect that. So this has gone ahead and smoothed it. And so in most cases, it's smoothed out all these wonderful edges. Everything's much better. But we still have a couple of little issues, right? So in particular, these two areas. So it's fixed most of it, but it does have an issue where we've got, some n-gon action going on here. So it's not quite sure what to do with that. So this is where I would go ahead and manually fix it. And it's really simple to fix. We've already seen it. I just go into my, not vertex face, but into my vertex because I actually want them unified. I'll grab those and that, and we'll go to the Vertex Normal Edit tool, and I can just do a quick spin there. And with that, that's been fixed. And we'll do it again over here, which is also, again, another n-gon issue. We'll grab those, and this one, just do a quick spin, which is going to unify them. And you just need to correct those kinds of issues. So there's can deal with this. There we go. And that takes care of all those weird shading issues. So outside of adding additional geometry to fix these, we can manually repair a lot of these minor issues with just that. I turned off the mitering, which will also prevent, the live bevel node from constantly changing and altering the bevel information. And there are some scripts out there which do face-weighted normals to even prevent you from having to manually fix some of those additional errors, although I'm not sure if it handles n-gons any better than, say, the default Maya one, but that's fairly useful as a trick. So just as a quick overview, average will take them all and average them out, and basically it softens the entire surface. We have the conform, which will take anything that is not aligned with the neighbors and fix that. We have the reverse, obvious. It just takes those and turns them inside out, based on the face normal usually. Then we have set to face, which, like I said, we have either where it unlocks them or where it locks them. And when it locks them, it works similar to the face weighting method done in other scripts and in other software. Then we have the harden edge, where it basically sets it to the individual face, soften edge it, where it's kind of averaging between the values. And then we have based on an angle here. So this angle we can set, 30 I find is usually a little bit too shallow. I'll go around 60 to 90, and that usually works fairly good for a lot of surfaces. And what that does is once it gets to a certain point, it turns it into a hard edge, but anything under that gets converted into a soft edge, which is fairly useful. You can also do it based off the texture borders if that's important to you. Locking and unlocking the normals. Often cases you won't necessarily want to lock the normals, but there are some cases where you do, and so you can lock them. That might be useful before you export them to make sure that they remain where they're supposed to be. And then of course unlocking to get rid of any weird artifacts caused by lock normals. So those will be areas of your mesh that have turned black or shading in some kind of weird, bizarre way, providing it's not a Zfighting flickering issue. Then we have the Vertex Normal Edit tool for dealing with manual problems. Vertexes that are not aligning, the shading not aligning across two separate surfaces, like we talked about with regards to the cliff face, as well as correcting, issues here where they're too separated to work. So this is an n-gon, but also once I add polygons, it might still have that shading issue. So those are all the vertex normals. We've seen how to apply normal maps, in essence how normal maps work, and hopefully you've gotten a lot of information from this. This is a longer video overall, but hopefully you weren't bored. That's it for me.